Some people would say that I can't teach you to be fearless, but I would disagree. So in today's video, we are diving in. I am diving in with something, art supplies I have never used before. And I didn't test them out. I didn't sketch first. I didn't do anything to prep myself to use these new to me art supplies. I just dove right in. And today's a wonderful lesson in how to paint poppy flowers. They're my favorite. Oh. But at the same time, today's going to be an exquisite lesson in composition and how to become more fearless. The best way to combat fear in your art journey is to try a new art supply and not overthink it and just see where it takes you. So bravery breeds fearlessness. So the more you let yourself be brave in your art experience, the more fearless you'll become. So come on, let me show you. This is gonna be a good one, a good one. You ready to paint? All right, let's go. All right, here we go. I have my Academy rough watercolor paper. This is like a 12 by 12 inch. I chose this specifically because I wanted some room to move. These markers are definitely not as small and streamlined as what I'm familiar with the Zig watercolor markers. And so I felt like a smaller piece of watercolor paper would feel a little bit inhibiting. So here we go. Here they are, friends. And as you can see, there's just something so delightful about the packaging. It draws you right in. But these definitely have kind of a Crayola marker vibe in terms of the shape of them. And I was surprised by that. I am super familiar with and absolutely adored the Kuretake Zig clean color watercolor markers. I use them a bunch here on the channel. If you want to go check it out, head to this playlist. I'll be honest, I did think about one detail before diving in, and that was very simply the flower that I was inspired to paint. And I chose a poppy because this yellow right here inspired me to do kind of an Icelandic-ish poppy. And poppies are my favorite flower, and I just felt like this was a really good jumping off point. So yeah, this feels heavier in the hand, and so I think a loosey-goosey, bold and free style painting is the way to go. So I'm starting off wet on dry. Admittedly, these markers do not feel super juicy, which I was a little surprised by. They're not nearly as juicy as the Kuretake Zig clean color markers that I mentioned. So I'm going in with my 3/4 inch flat wash brush and I'm adding clean water. And honestly, it's taking a little bit more friction with the water on my brush against the pigment I've laid on the paper than I thought it would. But I'm okay with it. Once I kind of have my bearings now, so I'm just going to scratch on more color loosely in the shape of the ruffly poppy petals. And then I know I can go back in with my brush, damp or even dripping with water, and really start to move around that pigment. I highly suggest when you're working with watercolor markers, paint pens, anything of the sort, don't feel like you have to cap them as you work, especially if you are painting for only like 20 minutes, half an hour, even up to 45 minutes. Don't stress about capping your marker every time you've finished with it. I feel like that creates a real like creativity flow issue when you're always panicking about recapping markers. So let them go. They are designed to be in the open air for a little bit. They're not going to dry up quickly, so don't panic about that. Okay, so adding the center here, using 2 different greens. I went in with a lighter green. There is some spring and some flexibility in the tips of these markers, but again, not at all like an actual paintbrush, watercolor brush, or like the Kuretake markers. There's not nearly as much give. And so when you press down, if you want to get that thicker mark that you would imagine getting from pressing down on a traditional paintbrush, you got to press harder and also know that there's going to be a limit to how thick of a mark you're going to be able to get. But on the flip side, the detail that I'm able to get from these markers is pretty exciting. So I'm going in now and I'm putting some clean-ish water on the page in the shape of a leaf. And then I'm hitting that area with the marker, just linear marks, little scratchy, sketchy marks. And wow, is that color traveling? Little tip there, don't feel like you always have to hold your markers like you would a pencil. You can hold them down with your pointer finger like I just did. I don't know what that grip would be called, but it's just another way to hold any brush, pencil, marker, pen in a way to get different type of marks. And in this case, more freeing, bold, expressive, gestural marks. So keep an eye on how you're always holding your creative implement, let's say. So in many ways, I am sketching with these markers. So it's an interesting kind of dichotomy of experiences happening. So you've got this brush-like marker tip, and you're holding it like a pencil or a pen, but it's acting in a lot of ways like watercolor would. So it takes a little getting used to. It's a little like jarring, but in an exciting way. So don't be afraid of it. Remember, when you have new supplies to play with, that is the key word. Play, experiment, make a mess. The biggest mistake that we all make in this creative journey, regardless of where we're at, how many quote years we have into this thing, the biggest mistake we all make is not properly setting our own expectations. I did not sit down today with the intention of creating a masterpiece that I would turn into artwork I could license or even sell the original. That was not my intention. My intention today was to play with new supplies by creating a finished piece of artwork. So let me explain a little bit more how that's different from how you might be accustomed to playing with supplies or what you might be seeing elsewhere on YouTube and beyond. There's a lot of sketching, sketchbook stuff, journaling, swatching that goes on, especially in the watercolor world. And it creates this kind of expectation that before you can create quote unquote real artwork, you've got to plan and mess around and use scratch paper and do all the non-real stuff for a while before you deserve the real art making experience. And I say boo to all that. I want you to get familiar with your new supplies by creating real artwork. That is what I want for you, because that, to me, in my humble opinion, is the most authentic way to get acquainted with new supplies. You're doing the real thing. You're creating the real artwork. You're not just scratching some color onto a page to do experiments and studies and all the things. You're getting right to the good stuff. Okay, so if you're enjoying this video, friends, I invite you to give this video a thumbs up, a boop, and subscribe, because I don't want you to miss a thing. And if you're loving this vibe and you want more specific instruction on how to paint a poppy, check out this video, because you're going to be painting a poppy in 5 minutes flat. Okay, a couple of thoughts now on how I'm actually creating the shape of these petals and what I'm thinking about composition. So again, I'm using markers that are acting like watercolor, but in a lot of ways, I'm calling on like my sketching skills. So couple of things. Your main flower, your big focal point flower, which is the one obviously right in the center. We'll talk about that more later, but 5 petals. I love the kind of organic vibe that 5 petals gives you in a composition. Make sure that you're radiating your petals out from the center of the flower. And those petals where they meet the center should be a little skinnier. And that's just going to give you a more natural looking flower. And then, of course, remember, each petal is made by God and Mother Nature. And you know what? They're never going to look like another petal. So make sure each of your petals has its own kind of personality. So a little bit wider, a little bit longer, a different ruffle on the edge. These are all things that I'm thinking as I'm developing my flowers. I get a lot of questions about how I develop a composition. And so I thought it was time to really start to address that on this channel. And what better way to address it than to point out where I went wrong a little bit, a misstep. So my big focal point flower just happened to land right in the almost exact middle of my paper, which is just typically not something that is as visually pleasing as if your focal point were off to the left third or the rightmost third of the page. And I can tell you all the reasons why visually that makes sense, but that's for another video. But just know that your big, bold bloom that you want to be the focal point, don't put it right in the middle of the page, but there are things we can do to combat that. So I added a larger leaf to the right of the main poppy, and I also added a robust, very full cluster of pods just below that main poppy. And so the poppy still remains the focal point, but the attention fully being on that ill-placed central poppy is shifted a little by a really interesting big bold leaf and the grouping of pods. So back to what is quickly becoming my little love affair with these markers. Once everything is dry, you can go back in, of course, like you would with regular watercolor and brush, and add detail. Now, I'll be honest, because of the bulk of these markers and the somewhat inflexibility of the actual brush or marker part of the marker, it's a little difficult to get a super fine line. So you might have to practice a little in kind of just whispering above the page to get that thin line that you want. But the thing is, kind of sink into it. These brushes, these pens, these markers, whatever you want to call them. They call them brush pens, but friends, they act a little bit more like a marker. Just lean into what they are and don't try to fight it. And that is one of my biggest tips for experimenting with a new supply. Don't fight it. Once you start using the new material, the new paint, the new marker, the new pen, and you feel like it's pushing you in one direction, fighting that direction is just going to leave you feeling frustrated. So what do I mean by that? With these brush pens, I'm going bold, I'm going big. I'm not trying to get super fine, realistic detail. And because I'm kind of going with the flow of my new supplies, I'm really excited about what I'm producing here. Okay, I'm going to speed this up now and just wrap up some thoughts on experimenting with new supplies and composition. And friends, all the same quote unquote rules apply when it comes to using these markers and any type of watercolor marker. Wet on wet, wet on dry, wet on damp, all the same rules apply. And if you're curious what I mean by all of that crazy that I just said, check out this video because this will take you on a little bit of a deep dive into the technique that I lovingly call wowed. Another fun tip that I have when you're trying out new supplies is to limit yourself to how many colors you're using in this particular painting. So, I'm a big fan of actually creating, quote, real art instead of just swatching out the colors or playing in your sketchbook with these new supplies. But at the same time, I don't want you to feel pressure to use all of the colors. I mentioned earlier, I was really drawn to that one particular yellow, and that's kind of where I've hung out. Yellows, oranges, greens, a little bit of blue. I did pull in the pink, but that's it. I haven't even used a third of the markers in this set, and it's given me a sense of peace and of calm, which brings me to yet another important point when it comes to new supplies. I myself can get very overwhelmed. I have 3 new watercolor palettes that I received for Christmas, and I have yet to try them because you know why? I've been overthinking how to try them instead of just sitting down in the moment with the instinct of it's time to try these new materials and just having at it. No, instead, I've been ruminating on exactly what I want to paint, how I want to paint it. And here I am. How many weeks are we out from the holidays? And I've yet to try my new supplies. Now, I broke that fast with these brush pens, markers, whatever you want to call them. And I feel so good for it. So just go easy on yourself in terms of the planning piece of trying out new supplies. Don't overplan, don't overthink, just grab and go. If you're enjoying my crazy, what's become a little bit of a creative stream of consciousness video today, please give it a boop, give it a like, let other people know that it's out there. And of course, if you haven't already subscribed, please go ahead. Lots of amazing stuff coming up on this channel that I'm super excited about. Okay, another thought on composition is scale and contrast. I am definitely going to get more into composition in future videos, but I love where this has gone. Scale and contrast is so important. So we have the big, bold flower we've talked about already, and that's our focal point. We've got the big, bold leaf, and we've got the kind of medium, like visual cluster of those pods. Well, friends, think about contrast. We need smaller elements. We need a little bit of finer detail, and that's why I brought in those side view poppies to contrast the bigness of those main elements. If everything in your composition is about the same size, your eye gets super bored. All right, friends, now go grab whatever new supply you've been putting off trying, and happy painting.